Columbus arrived in October 12th, 1492. However, what many don't know is that along his route, he kidnapped several young indigenous men. He himself wrote, "All that I saw were young men, none of them more than 30 years old, very well built, of very handsome bodies, and very fine faces. Their hair coarse, almost like the hair of a horse's tail, and short, the hair they wear over their eyebrows, except for a hank behind that they wear long and never cut. Some of them paint themselves black, and they are of the color of the Canary Islanders, neither black nor white. And others paint themselves white, and some red, and others with what they find." As his boat was along the shoreline, indigenous people were very curious, the ones from these particular islands that he arrived at. Because the first ones he had seen had run off, but the word had spread that they didn't seem like a threat. They slowly began to arrive at their boat, at Colon's boat. And they went to the boat on canoes. Some of them went and swam out to the boat. But the Spanish always deceived the indigenous people. And as some of them climbed onto his boat, he actually took them hostage. But before betraying them, he saw parrots, he saw trinkets, he saw so many items that they had crafted. But the most important thing was that he saw gold pieces in the form of nose rings. By October 20th, he had at least 7 captives. And through signs, these captives let him know that in other islands, there were indigenous people with huge pieces of gold in form of bracelets on their arms and legs. And he was excited. Gold where? So he got close to shore to one of the islands because the indigenous people said or signed that this is where to go. As they approached shore, one by one, the captives swam off, and Colon was furious. He wrote, "I dispatched several seamen in hot pursuit of the fugitives, chasing them ashore, but they all fled like chickens." By Tuesday, October 30th, he was on his way again. We know that by then he had captured more indigenous people and were now using them as guides. They now treated these indigenous people, who we believe were probably young boys under the age of 20, and they treated them extremely well. They gave them lots of food. They were very accommodating to them because they wanted to win their trust. They also displayed their swords, because Christopher Columbus did carry, or arquebuses. Display of force basically convinced the young indigenous boys to cooperate. And they were then sent out with some of Colon's men from island to island to convince the indigenous people that were already on the island that their visitors were good people. By the beginning of November, Colon says that he did this deliberately. He would entice the Indians to come on board his ship. But then he himself wrote that these Indians whom I took along, I often misunderstood. Taking one thing for the opposite, and I don't trust them much. Why? Because they have tried to flee. I mean, I would too if some weird dude was kidnapping me. Hello. By November 30th, Colon was getting anxious because he couldn't find a good wind to set the 3 ships to sail. He then sent another scouting party with 8 of his seamen and 2 Indian translators. So we assume that these 2 were the young indigenous boys. He sent them to communicate with the people that they found. At first, they went house to house to the village that they found, and there was nobody there. But then all of a sudden, the people appeared, apparently coming back from hunting, whatever activity they were doing. The moment that they saw these strange people in their town, they just ran for it. The sailors that were with the boys grabbed them and gave them several gifts: hawk's bells, brass rings, and green and yellow glass beads, and told them, signed to them, "Get them back here, we want to communicate." And the indigenous boys did just that. They ran after the people, signing and letting them know however they could, because they didn't all speak the same indigenous language, but they managed to get them to listen. We know that by December 6th, the boys told this to Colon. Indians accompanying suddenly announced they had great desire to go to their own country. But Columbus ignored this. He didn't care. By then, it seems that they had trained the boys to kind of give the same script. Hey, we're not from hell or from wherever scary place. These are good people.